Imagine holding a stone in your hand. It feels solid, dense, stable. Now imagine zooming in. Atoms, then electrons orbiting nuclei, then zoom in further. Quarks, gluons. You might think you eventually reach tiny, solid building blocks of reality, but modern physics says something far stranger. There are no fundamental things, there are only fields. And what you call a particle, an electron, a photon, a quark, is not a tiny object. It is a vibration, a ripple, an excitation of a field that fills the entire universe. This is not metaphor. This is quantum field theory. To understand how radical this is, we have to go back. In the early 20th century, Max Planck discovered that energy is quantized. It comes in discrete packets. Then Albert Einstein showed that light behaves like particles, photons, in the photoelectric effect. Niels Bohr introduced quantized orbits. Werner Heisenberg and Erwin Schrödinger formalized quantum mechanics mathematically. Quantum mechanics was already strange. It replaced definite trajectories with probability waves. It replaced certainty with uncertainty. But even quantum mechanics still treated particles as fundamental entities described by wave functions. Then came a deeper shift. Paul Dirac, one of the most mathematically elegant physicists in history, tried to reconcile quantum mechanics with Einstein's theory of relativity. Relativity says space and time are unified into space-time. Physics must respect that symmetry. When Dirac combined relativity with quantum theory, something unexpected happened. His equations did not merely describe electrons. They predicted anti-electrons, antimatter. The math demanded it. This was not philosophy. This was structure revealing reality. Soon after, physicists realized that treating particles as independent objects was inadequate. The deeper theory that emerged in the mid-20th century was quantum field theory. Here is the core idea. Instead of particles existing in space, fields exist everywhere in space. The electron field exists throughout the entire universe. The photon field exists everywhere. The quark fields exist everywhere. A particle is what you observe when one of these fields vibrates at a particular location. Think of the ocean. The ocean is the field. A wave is not a separate thing from the ocean. It is the ocean behaving in a certain way. The wave does not exist independently of the water. Likewise, an electron does not exist independently of the electron field. It is the field oscillating. This changes ontology. Ontology means the study of what fundamentally exists. Classical physics said, things exist. Quantum field theory says, fields exist. Things are temporary patterns. Let that settle. What you call matter is structured excitation, not solid essence. Richard Feynman, one of the architects of quantum electrodynamics, described particle interactions using diagrams that represent exchanges of field excitations. He once said that what we call particles are just convenient ways of talking about field behavior. Even the vacuum, what we think of as empty space, is not empty. It is a seething structure of fluctuating fields. Vacuum fluctuations are not poetic imagination. They are measurable effects. The Casimir effect experimentally demonstrates that what we call empty space contains energy due to field behavior. So space is not empty. It is structured. The universe is not made of things. It is made of dynamic, interacting fields. Now pause, because this is not just physics. It is philosophical. For centuries, humans assumed reality was composed of stable substances. Tables, rocks, bodies, atoms. But if fields are fundamental and particles are temporary excitations, then stability is emergent, not intrinsic. You are not made of solid objects. You are a dynamic pattern in a field structure. Your body feels solid because field interactions produce resistance. Electromagnetic field interactions prevent atoms from collapsing into each other. The solidity of matter is electromagnetic repulsion at the quantum level. Touch is field interaction. This is not mysticism. It is physics. Now ask yourself something deeper. If at the most fundamental level reality is pattern rather than object, what does that imply about identity? Before we go there, let's stay grounded. Quantum field theory is not speculative metaphysics. It is the most experimentally successful framework in physics. The Standard Model, built from quantum field theory, predicts particle behavior with extraordinary precision. The Higgs field, predicted theoretically, was confirmed experimentally in 2012 at CERN. The Higgs boson is not just a particle. It is an excitation of the Higgs field. And the Higgs field gives mass to other field excitations through interaction. Mass itself emerges from field interaction. Mass is not fundamental substance. It is relational property. This matters because it means that properties arise through interaction. They are not self-contained essences. Now we begin bridging carefully. Philosophers like Aristotle believed in substance, that objects have inherent essence. Quantum field theory destabilizes substance metaphysics. Reality becomes relational and structural. Carlo Rovelli, in Relational Quantum Mechanics, emphasizes that properties exist relative to interactions. Quantum field theory already suggests that what we call particles are not standalone entities. They are relational excitations. Now bring this closer. You experience yourself as a stable identity. I am this kind of person. But what if identity is more like a field pattern than a solid object? What if personality traits, habits, and emotional patterns are structured excitations within a biological and social field? Your brain itself is a dynamic network of electrical and chemical signaling. Neurons fire. Synaptic strengths shift. Hormonal states fluctuate. There is no static core. There is process. This does not mean identity is illusion. It means identity is dynamic configuration. The same way a particle is not an independent object but a stable excitation under certain conditions, your psychological patterns may be stable excitations within neural and environmental fields. Stability does not require solidity. It requires structured repetition. And repetition requires structure. This is where transformation becomes structural rather than motivational. If you think of yourself as solid substance, change feels like destruction. If you understand yourself as configuration, change becomes reconfiguration. Quantum field theory does not say you can magically become anything. Fields have constraints. Interactions obey laws. But configurations shift under different conditions. Temperature changes phase. Pressure changes behavior. Energy input changes structure. Ice becomes water, not by ceasing to exist, but by reorganizing molecular interaction patterns. Field excitations shift under different boundary conditions. Now let's return to physics briefly. One of the most profound aspects of quantum field theory is renormalisation. When physicists first developed quantum electrodynamics, their equations produced infinities, infinite self-energy, infinite corrections. Reality could not be infinite in that way. Renormalisation was developed as a method to systematically absorb infinities into measurable quantities. But renormalisation revealed something deeper. Physics depends on scale. The behavior of systems changes depending on the energy scale at which you examine them. At one scale, particles behave one way. At another scale, interactions look different. This is called scale dependence, and it has philosophical implications. What appears fundamental at one level may not be fundamental at another. Now consider identity. At one psychological scale, you may appear rigid. At another scale, when context shifts, new behavior emerges. Scale changes interpretation. Zooming out reduces apparent instability. Zooming in reveals fluctuation. Physics teaches that what you perceive depends on scale and interaction. That applies to matter, and arguably to self. If fields are fundamental and particles are excitations, then what we call empty space becomes the next question. Because if fields fill the universe, what is the vacuum? In classical intuition, a vacuum is nothing. Absence. Emptiness. But in quantum field theory, the vacuum is not empty. It is the lowest energy state of all fields. And even in that lowest energy state, fluctuations occur. These are called vacuum fluctuations. They are not metaphorical. They are mathematically predicted and experimentally supported. The Casimir effect, for example, demonstrates that two plates, placed very close together in a vacuum, experience a measurable force because of quantum fluctuations between them. So even what we call nothing is structured. The vacuum is a sea of potential. Fields exist even when no particle is present. A particle is simply a detectable excitation above that baseline. This means something profound. Being is not opposed to nothingness. What we call nothingness is structured possibility. And that shifts philosophy. For centuries, philosophers debated whether something can arise from nothing. But quantum field theory reframes the question. The vacuum is not nothing. It is a field configuration with minimal energy. Existence is excitation of structure. Now consider emergence. Reductionism says that if you understand the smallest building blocks, you understand everything. But quantum field theory complicates reductionism, because what appears fundamental at one scale may dissolve into structure at another. The Standard Model describes fundamental fields, but those fields interact. And from interaction emerges complexity. Chemistry emerges from quantum interactions. Biology emerges from chemistry. Consciousness emerges from biological networks. Emergence means that new properties arise at higher levels that are not obvious from lower-level description. Temperature is not visible in individual molecules. Life is not visible in isolated atoms. Meaning is not visible in neurons. Emergence does not deny lower-level structure. It acknowledges that organization matters. Pattern matters. And here is where the idea that reality is pattern rather than thing becomes clearer. A whirlpool in a river is not a thing. It is a stable pattern in flowing water. It has shape. You can point to it. You can describe it. But it has no substance separate from the water. It is organized flow. Likewise, a hurricane is not a thing separate from air and pressure gradients. It is structured interaction. A human being, at one level, is structured field interaction across multiple scales. Biological, chemical, electromagnetic, informational. This does not diminish reality. It deepens it, because patterns are not illusions. They are real structures with causal power. The electron is real, but it is real as excitation, not as miniature marble. Now let's bring this back to identity carefully. When you say this is just who I am, you are often describing stabilized patterns, neural pathways that fire reliably, emotional responses that recur, narratives reinforced over time. But patterns are not immutable substances. They persist because conditions reinforce them. Change the conditions, and patterns can reorganize. In physics, phase transitions occur when parameters like temperature or pressure cross critical thresholds. Water becomes ice not because its molecules vanish, but because their interaction structure changes. Ice becomes water when constraints loosen. The underlying molecules remain. The configuration shifts. In complex systems theory, this is called criticality. Small changes near a threshold can produce large-scale structural transformation. Now imagine applying that concept not metaphorically but structurally. If your psychological patterns are stabilized through repetition and environmental reinforcement, then transformation is not about destroying the self. It is about shifting the field conditions. Habits, relationships, informational environment, physiological regulation. These are boundary conditions. Boundary conditions shape stable patterns. Quantum field theory does not say you can become anything arbitrarily. Fields obey equations. Interactions obey constraints. But within those constraints, configurations vary. The same electron field can host countless excitations across the universe. The same biological organism can host countless behavioral configurations across a lifetime. Now consider something even subtler. The stability of matter itself depends on interaction. Electromagnetic repulsion prevents atoms from collapsing. The Pauli exclusion principle prevents identical fermions from occupying the same quantum state. Structure emerges from constraint. Freedom is not absence of structure. It is navigation within structure. That has philosophical implications. If reality is structured interaction rather than static thing, then meaning may arise relationally rather than intrinsically. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything exists through interaction. Your body exists through interaction with electromagnetic fields, gravitational curvature, biochemical exchange. Your identity exists through interaction with memory, environment, language, culture. This does not dissolve individuality. It contextualizes it. Now let's connect this directly to the idea of pattern versus thing. If reality is fundamentally fields and excitations, then permanence is not substance but persistence of pattern. A flame looks continuous, but the molecules composing it change constantly. Your body replaces cells over time. Your neural connections rewire. And yet you experience continuity. Continuity may be pattern persistence across change. This insight is stabilizing. Because if you understand yourself as pattern rather than rigid object, change becomes reorganization, not annihilation. In Quantum Reset, I explore the idea that identity is dynamic configuration. That is not motivational language. It is structurally consistent with how modern physics understands matter. If the universe at its base is not made of static objects but dynamic fields, then rigidity is emergent, not fundamental. Stability requires reinforcement. When reinforcement shifts, structure adapts. This perspective does not trivialize struggle. Field interactions are governed by equations. Constraints are real. But within constraints, variation is possible. Emergence shows that complexity arises from simple rules. You are not separate from physical structure. You are physical structure expressing itself at biological and psychological scales. And that scale matters. Remember, renormalisation and scale dependence. What appears chaotic at one scale may appear coherent at another. Zoom in on a city and you see individuals. Zoom out and you see traffic flow patterns. Zoom further and you see economic systems. Reality reorganizes across scale. So when you evaluate your life from only one level, one moment, one emotion, it may appear unstable. Shift scale and structure emerges. Physics teaches humility. It shows that intuitive solidity is often structured interaction. It shows that emptiness is structured potential. It shows that permanence is stabilized excitation. And it shows that reality is deeper than surface appearance. You are not a thing sitting in a universe of things. You are structured activity in a universe of structured activity. That is not poetry. That is quantum field theory. And when you internalize that, identity becomes less rigid and more structural. Change becomes less threatening and more geometric. Transformation becomes less about becoming someone else and more about reorganizing the field conditions that sustain patterns. The universe is not made of little objects. It is made of fields. And you are not a fixed object moving through it. You are a dynamic configuration within it. The deeper you understand structure, the less you fear change. Because what feels solid may simply be stabilized pattern, and patterns can evolve. That is not mysticism. It is physics extended thoughtfully into philosophy. And philosophy, when grounded in physics, becomes clarity rather than abstraction. Particles do not exist as tiny independent things. They are excitations of fields. And perhaps the most liberating implication is this: you are not a static entity trapped in circumstance. You are structured interaction capable of reconfiguration within constraints. The same universe that produces stable matter through field interaction also produces adaptive systems through pattern variation. Understanding that does not give you magic. It gives you orientation. Reality is deeper than it appears. And so are you.